Hello and welcome. Welcome everyone to the Yale University Art Gallery. My name is Stephanie Wiles and I'm the Henry J. Heinz II Director. We're thrilled to have Jim Dine here with us today for a conversation about his work. It's almost impossible to introduce an artist like Jim properly, given his astonishing career, but I will try. Jim Dine is one of the most inventive and prolific artists of our time. His career spans more than 7 decades, a lifetime dedicated to creative work, from early performance pieces to painting, drawing, and printmaking, sculpture and book design, poetry and photography. A life defined and continually redefined by experimentation and self-study. As Jim once said, I was an artist before I had language, from 2 or 3 years of age. That's all I wanted to be. That's all I could do. I met Jim Dine in 1998, soon after I arrived at Wesleyan University to oversee the Davison Art Center. Ellen Puffin-Dench, who some of you here might know today, was an amazing print scholar. She was a Yale alumna, having received her PhD here at Yale, and Jim's great friend. She introduced us. I knew of his work already, being a fan from my early college days, so meeting him was a great moment for me. Over the ensuing years, I've followed his work closely, and we've had fun collaborating on exhibitions and books together. And Jim is extremely generous, too. Just this morning, he presented a new gift of drawings to the Art Gallery's collection. Thank you, Jim. His work is held in public collections around the world, from San Francisco, the Museum of Modern Art, to the Art Institute of Chicago, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and up and down the East Coast. The MFA in Boston, in New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, MoMA, Whitney, and the Guggenheim, across Washington, D.C., at the National Gallery of Art, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, and the Smithsonian Institution. To the Tate Gallery in London, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and museums in the Netherlands and Asia. Here at Yale, at the Art Gallery, and also at the Beinecke, which holds his complete collection of artist books and the original manuscripts of 121 of his poems. Dine's creative output has been the subject of more than 300 solo exhibitions around the world, including 11 major surveys and retrospectives since 1970. Too many to describe, because we want to hear from you, Jim. But watershed moments include Jim Dine Walking Memory, a career retrospective organized in 1999 by the Guggenheim Museum, and one of my personal favorites, Drawings of Jim Dine, a major traveling survey organized in 2004 by the National Gallery of Art. Jim is truly a virtuoso draftsman, and that show summed up much of that power. And all the while, his work is being shown in museums around the world. Jim continues to create. Last year, on the occasion of the Venice Biennale, he made monumental new paintings, drawings, and sculptures, installed to amazing effect in a 14th century palazzo overlooking the Grand Canal, a testament to how he is always engaging with new ideas and has a passion, indeed a need, to continually make art. The Yale Art Gallery houses work by Jim Dine in all media. Many of these works were given to us over the past nearly 40 years by some of Yale's most important collectors. Others, the gallery acquired when they were newly made. Jim and his artistic team, including Yale alumnus Daniel Clark, class of 1993, who's on the stage here, are on campus this week to help us restore several of these bronze sculptures. And you see one on the screen to the left up there, Cromelink's Gate, with tools. And the tools, unfortunately, some of them came off and are being fixed even as we speak. This was a gift of Charles Benenson, BA 1933. Through June 8th, in our 4th floor galleries, you can visit a selection of Dine's works on paper. Well-known signature images, paintbrushes, house and garden tools, and crows appear in an array of exceptional drawings and prints. One needs to take time and look closely. Only by doing that will you be able to appreciate what he is trying to say and how he is saying it. In this exhibition, too, there are 9 remarkable heads made in watercolor in 1959 when Jim was 24 years old. His lifelong pursuit of themes of the self, the body, and memory jump out at you in these rare early works. The first group of these watercolors entered the Art Gallery's collection in 2008 as gifts from Richard Brown Baker. Others are recent gifts from Jim. And I really can't underscore how important I think it is to look at these watercolors and how infrequently they are on view because of their fragility. Today, Jim lives and works in Paris, in Göttingen, Germany, and in Walla Walla, Washington. "My whole life," he once said, "I've been in motion. I find it difficult to sit still. It's a hyperactive quality, I would say. I've always enjoyed going from studio to studio, country to country. For me, traveling is like using red. It's another thing to make the picture." The Art Gallery is honored to welcome Jim Dine here today for a conversation with Freda Spira, the Robert L. Sully Curator of Prints and Drawings, and with Jim's close collaborator, Daniel Clark. After graduating from Yale, Daniel moved to Paris, where he has lived ever since. Lucky Daniel. A painter in his own right, Daniel has worked with Jim for 23 years. Today's program is supported by the Martin A. Ryerson Lectureship Fund, and please join me in welcoming Jim Dine to Yale and to the Art Gallery. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Freda Spira. I just want to first welcome Jim and welcome Daniel. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you both today, and I'm going to start with something written just to get us going, and we'll try to describe in a tiny way how transformative it has been for me to get to spend time with you, Jim, and with your works. The utter amazement at your life as an artist who is constantly in the act of creating, and the joy you carry with it because of it, is really made an impact on my life, and the joy that you bring to making is so visible in all of your works. As Stephanie just noted, the remarkable heads that we see on the screen were made in the summer of 1959 and are on view in the galleries upstairs in the show Jim Dine, This Is Me, which is really just an amuse-bouche for the over 550 works of yours that Yale has in its collection, and as Stephanie noted, ever growing. This evening, we will see other works that are on view upstairs, but I would like to start with these 2 drawings. I feel like they're a good jumping off point to talking more broadly about you as an artist who resists labels, who works across media and pushes every boundary you can, who is interested in the labor and the mess of making, who works with his hands and often with what is on hand, who from this early moment played with color and monochrome, with materials, with memories and dreams, who understands his own face and being as inconstant and mutable, who records his own journeys, both physical and unconscious, through his artistic productions, which are themselves iterative or continuously in a state of change. And so I'm hoping just to start with these drawings and have you talk about them, and perhaps how all of your art making stems from the art of drawing.
Which is the question?
You could talk about the drawings themselves.
I will. I made them in the summer of 1959. I made them in the summer of 1959. My then wife and my baby, our baby, went to Dry Ridge, Kentucky, because my uncle had a kind of like redneck cabin on a lake that was, it was disgusting. The whole thing was, it was very humid, and I was 24 years old, my wife was 22, and the baby was 2 months old. And so I didn't know what to do with everybody, so we went down there because it was free, and I had a lot of paper with me and pencils and paper, and I literally, that was the first time ever that I really started to draw serially. And this, I mean, there must have been 100 of these done. My grandma came down, and we had a wonderful old time down there. And until I wanted to get back to New York because I had to teach. I was teaching grade school. And so I put the baby in the back seat. In those days, we didn't have seatbelts or car seats or anything. I put the baby in the back seat, and my wife was in the front seat, and we had a car wreck almost immediately, and my wife broke her arm. Anyway, the baby was fine, still is. But the reason I'm telling you this is then I had all the heads with me and took them to New York, where I joined a cooperative gallery, or where we started a gallery. And that winter, I showed them all on a wall. We pinned it up in the Rubin Gallery on Fourth Avenue in New York. And as a wall, it was part of a show called Below Zero. And in the show was Red Grooms and George Siegel and Bob Whitman and Lucas Samaras, a lot of people that I was associated with then. And there was one, and Klaus Oldenburg. And Oldenburg's, this is like lore. Is that okay? I mean, yeah.
Love lore.
Yeah. Anyway, Oldenburg's landlord, not landlord, his superintendent was there. And he was also kind of Oldenburg's guru. He was a man from Chicago called Dick Tyler, who dealt in the occult. You know, he saved his own fingernails, and he had all kind of herbs, and he was the first person I knew who had tattoos besides sailors and things. And he drank a lot. So at this opening, we all drank a lot. This opening, he had a big gulp of wine and spit it right out onto the drawings on this wall. And they started to, the wine was starting to come down, and then he threw wine at the drawings. It wasn't bad. You know, I mean, there was some improvement in some of the work. You know? But I was a little drunk too, so we had a fight, and he pulled a knife, and that's the way he was. That's the way he was. I mean, my life wasn't like that usually, I can tell you. But this is what happens. He pulled the knife, and then they disarmed him. All these artist pussies. That big deal. This was their big moment, you know, saving Jim. And but then I didn't do. Nobody bought the drawings. They were $10 a piece. They were for sale. Nobody bought the drawings. So after they dried, and there is one upstairs that's got the wine running down. After they dried, I put them away. And through the years, I lost a lot of them. And what was left, you got.
Yeah.
So it was a long way of saying, thanks for taking them, you know, off my hands. But it was exciting. It was an exciting way to draw, I felt, serially.
Do you think that the faces are all your face?
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
I think so. I think I was, well, yeah, I think so. I think that's the way I draw.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you use such different media, and you obviously are using your hands with a lot of them, and you can see your fingerprints along the edge of the graphic.
In those days, I just drew.
Yeah.
I hadn't taught myself how to look closely. I hadn't taught myself what it meant to make a drawing, but I thought, this is like expression, period, you know? And I got a lot of things that were self-portraits because I'd been looking at myself in the mirror for 24 years at that point, you know.
Yeah, and I love that you say that every morning when you look in the mirror, your face changes, and
also, I'm ready to draw.
And you're ready to draw. Yeah.
You know. And wait a minute, also there's another plus that's happened, the mobile phone. When I go on FaceTime with someone, I get my face and I can't take my eyes off it. And the other day, I started to draw myself again while I'm talking to somebody else, you know? I just saw it in my hotel room. It's like a doodle, but there I am again. Because I cannot believe the human visage. I cannot believe, I'm so interested in the organism, and I'm so interested in what happens through age and what gravity does and other things, you know, dissipation or whatever it is.
Jim, do you want to talk about the drawing the minutes, what you did during COVID?
Oh, yeah.
Because that was a
Well, I
very
was-
introspective time, but
Yeah, I mean, COVID was one of my unhappily favorite times. I know it's tasteless to say, but it was, because first place I could ride my bicycle in the city and nobody was there. And also I was totally focused on being inside, and I had this idea, I'm just gonna start to draw myself. And I made 12, yeah,
13, yeah.
13 drawings over 2 years. And I kept going back and correcting, which is my method of drawing or painting or anything. I'm always correcting and tearing it apart and putting it back together and rebuilding it. But this was a time of just looking that was so valuable to me. I had had another moment like that, actually 3 years like that, in the 70s when I stopped painting completely and just drew from the figure. Because I thought to myself, you know, I'm 40 years old, and it's about time it's about time I've got to be able to invent what I see, to express my invention or sense of it. So I spent these 3 years in the middle 70s drawing from the model and every day and erasing. Most of the time I just erased. My theory was, if I can do it once, I can do it again, which is slightly like running or weightlifting or something like that. It was a discipline. And it paid off in terms of looking. And then when I came to making these drawings during COVID, I really was there with me, sitting with me. And I could not get away from me. And I saw things that were there when I was 2 years old, when I had looked at myself. I saw things, because I was always interested in, you know, how you put together.
Yeah.
I'm not talking, maybe you could interpret it and say, you know, he's so vain, or, you know, it's like narcissistic. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I was interested in the way this is put on.
Yeah.
I was
And how
interested
you
in what
can
the
shape
flesh,
it and
yeah,
color it
yeah.
and
I was
disguise
interested in
it.
how the flesh develops, or what you've inherited. You know, some days, and through the year, I'm going to be 90, so I've had a lot of days. So some days through the years, I see my father. You know, I can't stand that. I mean, I happen not to have liked him, so it's not a plus. But there he is.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and you can't escape it.
Other days my mom's there.
Yeah.
You know, other days my cousins. You know, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the idea that I was born with this gift, so therefore I'm able to riff on it.
Yeah. And drawing was always a part of that practice.
Always.
And began it.
Well, but that's how children start anyway. I didn't come from the generation of felt pens. I'm a pencil guy.
Let's see if I can move this.
I mean, one thing in thinking about today, and thinking about the show that's upstairs, and about printmaking and drawing, and one thing I think that's for me, having had the privilege over the years of both printing for you and working for you in the studio, is the idea of coming back to a plate, back to an image, back to a place. And in preparing Venice last year, it was at the same time we were going through the drawings and going through your work. You had spoken about Dry Ridge, and then there was the portrait, which was included. And I think it's kind of, you know, for me, again, in thinking about today, you can draw through your parallels through your poetry, through your cooking, through your eating, through this idea of revisiting, of going back, not to repeat, but to reinvent or to correct. And it's something I'd love to hear your point of view on. Is it?
Well, I never throw anything away, nor do I ever make sketches. Oh, nor do I ever make sketches. I've always try to keep everything or put it aside and use it again in another way. And even in the sense of the head, the black and white head from '59, and the Dry Ridge portrait from 2023. The one from 2023 happens to be 7 feet by 7 feet. The other one is, it's upstairs. It's a small drawing, but they both are talking about the mystery of the visage that I am regarding, and also what you can do with it. It's about invention, and the same with, as you spoke about, the plates. I never thrown any etching plates away. I grind off sometimes an image, use it again, but often I leave the image and print it first, and then print a new image on top to get something going.
In putting together, because Stephanie mentioned the 121 manuscripts and they're now at the Beinecke, but in going through those, it's also very akin to your writing. The idea of revisiting, recorrecting, looking, adding, taking from one poem, adding to another poem. This idea to constantly question and constantly correct as if you were erasing a drawing.
It's true, and often when you hand me back poems that I've given you to transcribe or to change for me or something, and I use that then as a starting place, and we'll build on that poem. It's my method. It's correcting and adding and subtracting.
But what's interesting with the poetry too is there's never a date.
Right. It would be inaccurate if there was,
Because here with the painting, it's 2023,
Yeah.
and they go back 20 years, but and then sent them off, and now we're reworking all of them. I say we, but Jim is.
But it's amazing that over the course of 60 years, there's a desire to capture the work that you were doing then and to reclaim it and retell it.
I don't think
in a
it's a
different way.
desire to recapture anything like that. It's always there sitting
It's
with
always
me.
there, yeah,
It's part of my arsenal.
yeah, yeah.
The painting called Dry Ridge Portrait, I did a series of about 30 paintings, about 2 feet by 2.5 feet over the last few years, and called Me. And they don't look unlike the 7-foot square one, they're not studies, it's just what you do
Yeah.
when you got this face.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about being an expressionist artist?
Well, what else would you call me? You wouldn't. I'm not a minimalist. I'm not particularly classic, although I'm capable of drawing that way if I wanted to. But I believe that my earliest heroes were so-called German expressionists, Kirchner and Nolde and Max Beckmann and I was given. I worked when I was 17. I worked one summer, and the money I made, I bought a book called Modern Prints and Drawings by Paul Sachs, who was the head of the Fogg Art Museum. And it was things, I had already been to a museum, and I'm from Cincinnati, and there was a museum there in Cincinnati which had some objects of beauty, and there was a Cézanne watercolor, and there were certain things that were pretty good, wasn't bad. It's since been ruined by modern life, but it was a quiet, studious place. And so I had seen some drawing. I'd seen Fantin Latour, there was one. And anyway, when I was 17, I bought this book. But when I saw this book, and I saw like the Knoll des Prophets, or I saw, when I saw what these guys could do with a chisel,
Yeah.
and a piece of wood,
Yeah.
and just some black ink across there, the expressiveness and how I felt when I saw that. It was how I felt about what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
I didn't, not just how I felt psychologically, it's how I felt as a human when I saw that. And then I got into Koshkin and all kind of things like that. And fortunately, because of my age, because of when I was born, at that time, it led me into de Kooning,
Yeah.
And I was lucky to be a boy in the years of de Kooning. It was a privilege, and that's why it was the biggest disappointment in my life was I thought, stupidly, that after Picasso, Matisse, it was going to be de Kooning and Franz Klein in the world. Didn't work out that way. It just didn't work out that way.
Just to switch over to printmaking, it's really interesting to hear you talk about being drawn to the German Expressionists. A recent show we did was about Edvard Munch and Ludwig Kirchner, and I often think about your experience very akin to Munch's experience, which is as this creative human who seeks out sort of the best practical artists, best printmakers, best print shops all over the world to work with, and led a very itinerant life going back and forth to all these different print houses to work with the great specialists and to learn from them and for them to learn from you. So I just wanted to start with this diptych that you did in 1970 and just talk to you a little bit about your experiences with Tatiana Grossman and ULAE and the love of making prints and the love of paper and sort of how that affected you.
Well, I got to go back a little bit further than that.
Okay.
I was a very poor student in every school until I would have been called, I had attention deficit syndrome, that kind of thing, or I would have been called dyslexic or whatever. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do what was asked of me academically, nor did I want to. It wasn't that I was so frustrated. I was just looking at my clock, waiting to get out of there,
Yeah.
because I was born to do this, and I was not born to do mathematics. It's just, that's the way it was. And so I went to a college preparatory high school, a public school in Cincinnati, because I was smart, and therefore I passed the test. It was absolutely stupid that I should have gone to a vocational school, which would have been great. Instead, I was put in this Latin school based on the Boston Latin School for 6 years that I cheated my way through and was able to at least graduate, but they never told me about SATs. That's how they got back at me. So after I graduated, somebody said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I don't know. Where are you going?" They said, "Well, I'm going to Harvard. I'm going to Yale. I'm going to the University of Cincinnati." I said, No kidding. I said, how did you get there? What do you do? So it turned out that as an Ohio resident, I could go somewhere for very cheaply, $85 a semester, to a state university. And I had a friend from high school who said to me, you should come to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. 4,000 students, we got a great art department. He wanted to be a radio broadcaster, so he was he was gonna get a bachelor's of fine arts. And so I drove up there in my grandpa's car, and $85, and it was beautiful. It was in the Appalachian Hills, and I met the sculpture professor who immediately offered me a beer or something like that. It was like the most casual, coolest place because it was kind of dopey, and they'd never had anybody who only wanted to be an artist. Everybody there is just like my mother. My mother had been trained at the University of Cincinnati in the School of Education, like George O'Keeffe was at Columbia, that all came out of Columbia Teachers College to be an art teacher. And there was a couple of, I'm sorry to say this, there's a couple of these old maids who hated me being there. And I would threaten the whole thing because I refused to go to class. And all I wanted to do was paint. Everybody else said, fine. That's fine. So I had a drawing instructor who said, I'd like to teach you about printmaking. And he showed me how to make etchings. We did that. He showed me how to grind a stone, lithostone, and to make lithography, and to make woodcuts. And I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was going to get because of Paul Sachs, right. The book. I already knew that. And I never looked back on printing. It was like I was born to print. And when I got out of college, which I did with the help of some teachers, because I refused to do most things except print and paint, I went to New York, taught grade school, as I said, and immediately went to see what was going on in a print shop with Pratt University called Pratt Graphic Arts Center, where there was a woman called Nono Reinhold, who was a guest from Holland, an etcher. In those days, and maybe even now, there were print makers, and that's all they did. Mm-hmm. They printed, and they were artists, I guess, of not usually much interest, but they could really print. And she taught me a lot about etching, and she printed my prints, and I never stopped. And the next 2 summers later, I had met Jasper Johns, and he said, I would like to take you to Tanya Grossman's. That was UALE. Yeah. And I went and I made it. She said, darling, here's a stone. Mm-hmm. And so I never stopped making prints. And I've never stopped looking for printers. Because you always get something different. Mm-hmm. Really, always. It's always about the hand. That's why digital printing has no interest for me.
And when you think about where you go and who you work with, I'm just curious, you don't say, oh, I'd like to make an etching and I'm going to go and work in here. Are you more drawn to the city, or are you more drawn to the printer, and then you do what it is you can there? Or would you say, I want to make a series of woodcuts, I'm going to...
Well, I go where I can get, not necessarily, I don't go where I can get the best printer. Mm-hmm. I go where I'm most interested to go.
Gotcha.
And I've been very lucky to be able to go to Paris and work with the greatest etcher of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. He happened to have lived in Paris, but I went to Paris because I wanted to be in Paris. And I've been very lucky, like, as you know, to print with the couple on the Austrian border, woodcuts. And I'm lucky to find those kind of people. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I've worked with some fancy people who I just walk away. I can't. I'm not. But it's a personal thing. But it's always a pleasure to go to a new place. For me, it's what I do. Peripatetic and itinerant.
And seemingly free to do
yes.
different things at different moments. And in this diptych, you're, I think, the first one of the sort of earliest we have up where you're in London, where you're working with Petersburg Press and Ernie Dono. And this idea that like the left hand of the diptych is about refinement and austerity and line, and then the right side is a total riot of ink. And you sort of explode this notion of what a lithograph should be, which is really a delight to see. Especially
Well, it's actually not.
no.
No, I mean, it's not a lithograph. It's a lithograph underneath, and it's really black spray paint, which I controlled
Yeah,
You
which
know,
you sprayed onto the paper.
onto the paper.
Onto the
yeah.
paper. But that's amazing. That's completely breaking the rules and bringing things from different shops into the print shop, which is
Yeah, well, thanks.
yeah.
Thanks. But you'll notice that it is an offset lithograph. It's not, I didn't work directly on a stone or a plate. I worked on a mylar,
Yeah.
a piece of mylar, and then it was done onto, they transferred it onto a zinc plate on the offset press because the guy I worked with, Paul Cornwell Jones, the publisher, for some reason, we made about 5, some were very big, offset lithographs. They are lithographs, but it's just I couldn't get my hand in there once it was done, you know.
Yeah. And do you want to talk a little bit about the freedom of travel and being outside the United States and working in London for the first time?
Well, when I went, I didn't travel outside the United States till I was 30, and then I never stopped,
Yeah.
because it was freeing for me to have my passport stamped elsewhere,
Yeah.
you know, and I always was able to. It must be something about light that changes, or atmosphere, or the freedom of not being near the source of where you came from.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed to me probably I haven't thought about this before, but it is probably, if you think about it, if I thought about it, it would be like this map that was like, it said, right in the middle of the piece of paper, it said Cincinnati. And the further I get away from it, the more excited I am, and exciting, you know, and stimulated.
Yeah, and you can see that in the sort of,
Definitely I always thought it preserved a certain objectivity, because you, after a few weeks or a month in one place, you're able to go to another studio and see things fresh and see things.
That's
Differently.
been my method.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been my method, and it's a way to dodge what you leave behind.
I was thinking this afternoon, thinking about tonight, that what role is language? I mean, it seems the more I've been fortunate enough to travel quite a bit with you lately, and language keeps coming up as an issue in terms of being able to communicate, or to be able to write, or to understand who we're working with or what we're working on. Has that ever been an issue?
What do you mean by an issue?
But language, like being able to, is it like turning off the sound, going to Germany, not speaking German, or going to Austria, through this itinerant?
Well, all my life I've been interested in talking, and talking with the American language. And because I couldn't read very well, because I couldn't concentrate, and I couldn't stay with a novel, for instance, with a novel or literature, I could stay with poetry because it's shorter. And so I didn't have to think about it so much, and it was more like I could see it in one thing as an object, this poem. So I was more drawn to that than I was to writing fiction. But I always thought about that I wanted to write poems. And I started writing poems when I met poets, when I came to New York, and who were associated with painting, with the so-called New York School. And the talking that went on, I was charmed by it and really excited by it with the use of the language. And so through the years I've written, but these last few years I've written a lot because I've just decided to put it all down, you know.
And we'll see some of your poetry in a minute. And also beyond language in terms of writing, you also have a language of objects that sort of represent different aspects of yourself or your subconscious or your history or your memories. And so we see tools become or take on a central as a central motif in the works that you make. And they're both the actual tools that you use, but they're also avatars of the self, and the idea that within each context or within each grouping, the meaning changes, and over time the meaning changes. You were talking about travel, and these are works that you created in France. And Three Saws from the Rue Claire, you were saying, Daniel.
I was trying to explain to Frida the proximity of Aldo to the Rue Claire and the food and the impatience of waiting for them to pull the print. I could just see where you got the Three Saws.
Where I got the saws on the Rue Claire.
It's a Market Street in Paris, right around the corner from Aldo's studio. And, you know, I think it's very telling in a sense of, you know, nothing is very premeditated, but everything's very immediate and very intense. One thing that was beautiful about these two prints is how also we see them in a print which was created like 15 years later, where both of these plates have been reworked. You can see the first plate is on the left, and then the three saws in the middle plate, and how, you know, what we were talking about before with the dry ridge portrait is...
Say who printed it, Dan.
Back in the day. But it's just, I think it's fascinating in terms of, because it's not about repetition, it's about refusing to let go. You know, it's the fluidity almost of your process.
I just also think that you don't want to waste something. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's yours, it's yours.
Yeah.
And it's yours to use.
And we're going to turn from this, what I would call incredibly expressive, layered, interesting frieze of objects, all shown though in shades of gray, to the first etching that you see when you come into the gallery upstairs, which takes us back to 1970 and Petersburg Press, but also combines language and the paintbrush that is such an important aspect of art making, but also the wonderful mess that is the plate. And just, I read somewhere, and maybe this is wrong, that you had experienced many days in your grandfather's hardware shop, and that his floor was a cacophony of scraps and tools and objects, and that you didn't see it as a mess, you saw it as a constellation, as an image. And it feels to me that this plate on which Redbeard sits is a beautiful constellation, even though it appears to be marks made by chance.
Well, the print is really about printmaking. Mm-hmm. It's about printing. Mm-hmm. It's about etching, and it's about sitting with the plate and taking the needle and going at it in an obsessive way until you've built up a rich texture for the red beard. Mm-hmm. As far as saying paintbrush underneath, after all, I mean, Picasso and Braque did it in the first decade of the 20th century, using language in the image. And a painter wrote about me, about a show I had in 1962, and he said I was involved in tautology, you know. And that, I mean, I always like to name something. I like to name it. It's not about not trusting that you won't know that that's a paintbrush, but it is, I like to say that. I like to make a paintbrush, then I like to say paintbrush.
Were you thinking about, I mean, I see it, and I see it from the,
Well, I was really thinking about was pubic hair, let's face it.
I was thinking Rembrandt. You
But
know,
I was a kid, you know, when it was,
because the idea of making a hand-drawn aquatint, you know, not putting an aquatint down, but doing it purely in line, building up the red.
you mean not doing what?
I mean, I was thinking you were looking. I mean, clearly it's pubic hair, or hair, but it's also about building up a color.
Yeah, that's what I said. I
which
mean,
is
it's about
Rembrandt,
etching.
which is you know,
Yeah.
the idea, because you know, to do that, there's probably 4 or 5 etches. You know, when you
Yeah,
do
but
an
this is
etching.
particular, there's no dry point in this.
Yeah, no,
You
you
know, this is
So-
is hard ground etching.
So the plate is etched, and then it's re-varnished, re-etched,
Right.
re-varnished, in order to get the depth of tone. So it's also, you're a student of, I don't know if there was a Rembrandt in the Sachs book, but it's also,
Rembrandt,
I see it as like a student of looking at what printmaking can do.
yes.
You know,
I mean, you know, when you see, after you've done all this and printed for 20 years, and then you come upon Rembrandt,
Yeah.
you go to the British Museum and see a few Rembrandt etchings, you say, you don't know what you're doing, you know, compared to this. And I start to look and see where is the dry point on the print, you know, and you can just keep on learning that like that.
Yeah, and like Rembrandt.
That's a pleasure, I mean, really.
Yeah, I mean, Rembrandt, a scholar of print said that Rembrandt was the most confident of printmakers because he was so experimental. He would erase what he did and go over
Right.
it. And so very
and those
much in
tones,
line
they're
with
only
how
done
you
by
work.
that, by hand. No.
Yeah, yeah. And then I just want to point out that I love that you never thought about your favorite color, but you discovered that it was the color red. And that red comes in when you talk about traveling, and that words in a print are like a red stroke, which I think is kind of a wonderful thing. In this
I mean, they're
very red
interchangeable.
room.
They're interchangeable.
They're interchangeable, yeah. But that's pretty great. And then we returned to seriality, and you talked about the seriality of the heads that you made in 1959 being your first experience of seriality in drawing. And you have talked about this series, 5 Paintbrushes, as being your first experience of seriality in print.
Well, I realized that if you have a copper plate, you don't have to get rid of it. So I did one with 5 paintbrushes, and then I just kept adding,
Yeah,
you know? And that's the pleasure,
yeah,
to see what you can do. It's very much what etching is about, the states and building up the plate.
But it's also a great example of travel. These plates traveled from shop to shop. They weren't all done in the same plates. You know, you're talking about London, New York. And I think the
New York, exactly. And yes. And the final one I did in Paris, and we never editioned it with Aldo, with Cromlech.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between how you create space, where you leave it blank, and then in sort of the 7th iteration, you create this very cavernous, what I would call landscape with almost a horizon line and a sense of rootedness?
What do you want to know?
I'm just interested in, I'm interested in how it came to be, because as I looked through your work.
Because I always think, that's really why I enjoy printing so much. I always think, how can I go forward?
Yeah,
How can I add? How can I invent a new color, gray. I like to find something on the plate that has the most brushes. I've erased a lot of it. In 1972, I was artist in residence at Dartmouth College for a couple of weeks. And I met a man there who was a young etcher. And I said to him, I'd like to make a line that's like drawing, like with a pencil, because contemporary copper, modern copper, the molecules, I guess you would call, the way it's rolled out, stops you if you're not using acid, just using a needle. You can be drawing and suddenly it'll go, and you don't want that. So he introduced me to a guy who introduced me to a tool called a die grinder, and I used it for the first time on etching plates, and I could get a black without having to worry about this. I mean, Mary Cassatt, whose etchings I love, didn't have to worry about that. She had a copper plate that had been beaten, and it was made fluid because it had been softened, and the way the copper, the material was malleable with what you could do with it.
Yeah.
I used roofing copper at that point, and it was ridiculous, but with an electric tool. So that I used this die grinder, and then I realized there was a tool called a Dremel, which is like a dentist drill, and I could use that, and it jumped all over the place, but it still worked. And then I realized you could, with a sanding disc on a grinder, and with a buffer on that over the sanding, and oil, you could bring the plate back to gray or white from black. So that's the pleasure of etching, that.
Amazing, yeah.
It's all very alchemical,
Yeah. It's magic, right?
yeah.
And it resists in a different way than the canvas does, right?
Yeah.
The metal is something that gets in the way and invites you to challenge it in a way.
Yeah, and you do
Absolutely.
do subtly use different kinds of papers in addition to the way that you.
I have early on, I had a romance for handmade paper, and I found paper that made in France that was had flowers in it, but I always come back to just regular paper.
This is a great example of Tamarind, where you've worked, which is an absolutely wonderful print shop attached to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, which was created to preserve the art of lithography. And they form every year 2 master printers out of a class of 10. And it's really preserved the craft. And I was looking at this upstairs, and
This is a detail, though, isn't it?
It is a
it is a
detail,
detail.
sorry. I wanted people to be able
No,
to see.
it's okay.
Would you want to talk about working at Tamarind? Because you've been
I've been a few times.
times.
I've had a few stints there. There's usually there's 10 students taken each year, and then there's a kind of hierarchy. You print. The students help you schlep, but there's a student from the year before who is meant to be the one who's the best, and that student will proof for you, and then the head lithographer will addition, and he will do the etching. He will use the acid and lay the ink down on the stone, etc. It's very beautifully done there. The art of lithography, it's what Toulouse-Lautrec dreamed of.
Do you draw on the plate on the plate or the stone yourself, or?
Oh, always.
Always.
Yeah, always. And they have they have stones, they've recovered stones that are 5 feet tall. You know, can't use them too much, they're so heavy. But they are, to draw on a stone, a lithostone is a great privilege. It's a kind of living thing because the lithostone is porous. It's been quarried in Bavaria, only one place, and I think it's finished now. The quarry is finished. It's been quarried out. It's how posters were printed in the 19th century, and some newspapers even.
And labels for conserves.
Or cigars.
Yeah, it originated because he was an editor of music, Sennefelder, right?
Yeah, music.
Yeah.
Music sheets, yeah.
And those stones then were found in France, Morlot, and in America they were found by a woman called June Wayne, who started Tamarin. And to draw on the stone, like I said, is a privilege. It's because you can do all kind of things with it, and you feel it. You feel the water and the grease, and it's going in and taking away, and it's great. On the other hand, you can make a lithograph, and I often do, using a zinc plate that is meant to mimic the stone and doesn't particularly, but will give you a similar effect. It's not bad, and you don't break your back.
They call this the skin of the stone, as if it's like it is a living membrane.
Can I ask, as an aside, the plates and the stones that you've used, do you retain them? No.
No, you don't retain the stone. I keep the stones, but I erase them.
Erase the
So you
images,
can use it
Use
again.
it again, yeah.
I mean, I don't even take the image off until I'm ready to do it. Because if I did, then I'd have to do it again anyway, because it's so sensitive. The stone is so sensitive to oil and grease that so we just keep it covered with my old image, and then we take it off.
And by that, the grease of the hand. You know.
So we just wanted to touch on your collection in the Beinecke that relates to our collection. And, you know, as Yale moves forward, we are thinking very sort of cross-campus collections and collaborations. And this makes a wonderful foil to the collection here at the gallery, is this great collection, complete collection. And to just show sort of the persistence of certain symbols in your life.
But also going back to the very beginning, it's kind of this idea of the process, because the slide after this is the print that is also here at the museum, which is Children and Their Voices, where you've taken and additioned similar images from the Book of Jewish Fate, and in a different way, instead of isolated almost as portraits, they become integrated into the image.
Into the woodcut.
Into the woodcut.
Yeah.
And those two people before, the two printers in Austria, it's Gabby Peckman and, it's written, who are just amazing in what they do, only lithography and woodcut. And I just, you know, I guess we already talked about it, but it is something maybe needs to be repeated again. It's just this way of working, this way of, it's not about repetition, it's about the reinvention or the correction of the,
And it's always about going
fluidity.
forward.
Yeah.
And addition. But the fact is, I trust these people. Not everybody would be able to include that litho image with the woodcut.
I was happy to find the photo before and after. You know, it's interesting to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about your movement between media, especially printmaking media, and it doesn't seem like you have a favorite. It seems like you find pleasure in all of them. And I guess as a scholar of printmaking, all art making is, it's.
Well, I have no
stems from a
pleasure, I have no
desire.
pleasure in silkscreen.
No pleasure in
No.
silkscreen.
No.
Have you ever made silkscreen?
A silkscreen?
Yeah.
I guess so. I mean, I guess somebody has made it for me, and then I put something on top of it. Kind of, because there's no pleasure in it.
But with the techniques that you focus on, etching, woodcut, lithography, there seems to be moments where you go to each, where you travel to different places to sort of the great master printers in those particular techniques, or you invite those printers to your home to work on specific projects. But it doesn't seem to me that you favor one over the other. It's
No,
just,
no, I don't.
you don't.
No, I don't. I have no, I do what I feel is necessary for the image.
Yeah. And I really love, because you came upstairs to the gallery yesterday and you said, I love a show of black and white. So this idea of sort of the historical black and whiteness of prints, but also your ability and your, I guess, sort of the inclination to add so much color, and how that really affects sort of the mood, tenor, and dynamism of what
Of
you're
course
looking
it
at.
does, and print dealers are very happy when I use the color.
I think we're running out of time, but I just wanted to end with a quote from you. Just saying, I keep going because, like the people who swallow the knives and the nails at a sideshow, I just can't stop. I've put my life into it. Which kind of sums up the joy and pain that, exploring your unconscious, the journey of your life, the buildup of experiences and how they shift, how they're constantly, every experience shifts what you see and what you interpret and what you make. It's kind of a wonderful thing. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, but I want to say that, not to be gooey, but I am very moved that you all have accepted the work and me. Thanks. I really,
Oh,
it means
thank you.
it means a lot to the work.